Let's listen to the highlights from day one of the trial of Leilani Simon, accused of killing Quinton Simon.
This is Quinton Simon, at about a year and a half old, a little bit over that, 20 months. Like all children, he was blameless, he was innocent, and he was beautiful. And like all children, he was totally defenseless, totally and completely dependent on the adults in his life to take care of him and to look out for his safety. And the evidence in this case will show that the defendant violated that trust, that most basic, sacred trust of a parent.
Back on Thursday, prosecutors attempted to readmit evidence that had already been struck down by the judge. They say the night before Quinton Simon was killed, Leilani and her then boyfriend got into a fight. She then left to meet her drug dealers to pick up marijuana, cocaine, and Percocets. The state believes that Leilani was so low and desperate that she killed her toddler son. The defense claims this move by prosecutors is a Hail Mary pass and does nothing more than put Leilani in a bad light.
Day one. Let's take a listen.
In the middle of the night, she killed him, her own son, got in her car with his body, drove to a dumpster, and threw him away like a piece of trash. She would go home, go to sleep like everything was normal, and wake up the next morning and report it to the police as an abduction. I woke up, my front door was open, and my child was missing. Now, the story started to fall apart pretty quickly because of good, solid police work. But she would go on to tell a series of evolving lies over several weeks, only moving from one lie to the next as the police picked apart the first lie and presented her with the evidence that made the first lie untenable. So now it's time to move on to lie number 2, and 3, and 4. And as they're doing this with her, they're also searching for his body, which they ultimately discovered about 6 weeks after his disappearance in a local landfill, in pieces, unfortunately. And as a result of all of that police work and investigative efforts, which I think you'll be quite proud of when you hear about them in detail, the defendant is charged with his murder. So that's sort of the 50,000-foot view, the bluff, the bottom line up front for the military folks here. A little more detail on what happened, what the evidence will show. The 2 days that we're primarily concerned with here are October 4th and 5th of 2022, specifically the night of October 4th, moving into the morning of October 5th. At that time, the defendant is living here on the west side of Savannah. He most recently lived in North Carolina, where she had met and lived with her most recent boyfriend. And some months before October of 2022, they had moved down and were living in this house. The house belonged to the defendant's mother, Billy Joe Howell, her husband, Thomas Howell, who is not the defendant's father, but is her stepfather. Also living in the house, the defendant's brother, Paul Simon. They have the same mother and the same father. And Daniel Youngkin, her boyfriend from North Carolina, and the defendant's 3 children. October of 2022, she has 3 children by 3 different men. The oldest is Zane Wharton. I think he was roughly about 3 years old at the time. Zane has been through a lot with her. He's her firstborn son, and I expect you'll hear testimony that she considered him her ride or die. That's her guy. Sky Youngkin is an infant on the far right there. That is her youngest child by Daniel Youngkin. And in the middle was Quinton. Quinton was her child by a man named Henry Bubba Moss Jr. You'll hear that She had kind of a tumultuous relationship with Mr. Moss. They had split before she even knew she was pregnant with Quinton, and that he initially didn't even believe that she was pregnant when she told him, and that he was never part of Quinton's life at all. And I expect you'll hear some testimony about the way that background influenced the way that she treated Quinton. But you're supposed to love all your kids equally, you're supposed to treat them all the same. I expect you'll hear some testimony that didn't happen. She treated Quinton differently, and not in a good way. Here's the house from the street. Now, the defendant, Daniel, and the 3 children lived in a bedroom right through this front door. I think there was some sort of addition on the house at one point. This bedroom that they live in appears to be like a converted one-time living room or something like that. If you step through that front door, this is what you see. You see a couch in the foreground. You see a desk behind that. And then on the far wall there, you see a bed. That's the defendant and Daniel Youngkin's bed. If you pan to the right, you'll see a closet door here. And then it's hard to make out in this picture, but beyond this closet door is a door into a bathroom that then feeds into the dining room. And that is the only way to get from this room to the main body of the house. You see a race car bed there. That's where Zane slept. We further pan to the right. You can see that race car bed. And then if you pan into that right-hand corner, you see this pack and play. That's where Quinton slept. That was Quinton's bed. That sort of sets the scene as to who's living in this house. Before we come back to the morning of October 4th, I want to talk to you about what the evidence is going to show as far as what's the biggest thing going on in the defendant's life. And the biggest thing going on in her life in the months, days leading up to October 4th is the status of her relationship with Daniel Youngkin. Things are not good. She is feeling unloved, undesired, ignored. I want to feel beautiful, not barely average. I want to feel loved and not just liked. I want to feel wanted, not just tolerated. Now this is a 4-minute some video. This video was filmed in August of 2022, but the evidence in terms of the text messages and her statements will show that nothing really changed between when this video was filmed, October 4th of 2022.
Too sky. Rain. Quicker. Mama tried. Your mama's not here no more because she doesn't love you. I do. I can't love myself. If I can't love myself, how can I love y'all? And Quinton, baby. You middle child. You're so happy all the time. You smile all the time. I wish I could see what kind of man you would be too. And Danny, I loved you. I loved you with all of me, all of my heart. I loved you. You take care of my kids. Okay? You couldn't take care of me. You couldn't love me. You couldn't do me right. So please, for the love of fucking God, do my kids right.
I'm at the river now by Danny. So that's where she was at. This is her emotional state in the summer, fall of 2022. Billy Joe Howell, the defendant's mother, and Thomas Howell, her stepdad, are out of town. They're not in town. They're not in the house. They are sort of out of play. In the morning of October 4th, quite early in the morning, in fact, the defendant and Danny take the 3 children to babysitter Michelle McCardle. And it comes across more like they're almost like a second family or a substitute family for these kids. And the child care arrangement was this. At this point in time, Danny and the defendant are working at a warehouse in Port Wentworth. And their shift starts at 6 a.m. They're working the 6 a.m. shift. On the way to work, they'll drop off 3 children with Michelle. They clock in at essentially the exact same time, a little after 6 a.m. on October 4th. Now they clock out less than 2 hours later. And the reason they do that is the defendant is experiencing some kind of dental issue. She has a tooth that's bothering her and it needs to come out. And so they clock out right around 8 o'clock, just before 8 o'clock in the morning, and they go to some type of emergency dental clinic or walk-in dental clinic. And she gets a tooth pulled. These are some pictures, selfies she took of herself in the dentist chair, and you can see the side of her mouth on the left side there, I think, is kind of swollen. She sent these to Danny, who was sitting out in the waiting room waiting for her. And so after this, they do not go back to work. They go home, and the rest of the waking hours of the day are pretty normal. They get some lunch, they relax, her mouth is bothering her, she's tired, she's sore. About 4:30 in the afternoon, they go and they pick up the 3 kids from the babysitter from Michelle, and they bring them home. At that point, Danny, the defendant, and the 3 kids are in the house. Now Paul, he worked at the same warehouse, but he worked a later shift. So same place, different shift. So he's not there in the afternoon. Now they're there, they do dinner, they do bath time, they put the kids down. Quinton in his pack and play. I think a statement from the defendant that Sky, the infant, slept on that couch that we looked at, and Zane in the race car bed. Around 10 p.m., Quinton is fine. He's just in his crib, in his pack and play for bedtime, okay? And what happens at this point sets off a chain of events that goes over the next couple hours and results in tragedy. And that is that the defendant and Daniel have yet another argument about how he's treating her. This is sometime a little after 10 p.m. And that this is something she told to detectives eventually in some of her interviews. About how he doesn't want her, he doesn't want to touch her, he's not feeling desire for her like he used to. You know, we've already talked about this is a major trigger for her. This is the biggest emotional issue going on in her life, and it's significant. It drove her to the brink in the video that you've watched. This is not a minor thing for her. And so she leaves the house after 10 p.m. on the first of 2 trips that you'll hear a lot about in this trial, and that she didn't really want to talk about, at least truthfully, with investigators. And that first trip is to the drug dealer. She says that she left so that things wouldn't escalate between her and Danny. She was upset, that's her word. So it wouldn't escalate. The first place she goes is this Circle K, and I should have pointed out that you can see her getting out of the car. So about 10:30, I'll back up. You can see her getting out of her Dodge Journey with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Then she texts Danny. He's got her saved in his phone as Lanny Baby. She texts him, I'm going to run to 204, I guess. That's at 10:32. And 204 is an area you'll hear about in this case. It's shorthand for our drug dealer. I'm going to run to our drug dealer. Screenshot of some GPS plots from her phone that the police eventually made after getting into her phone. You can see Highway 204 here. And this red blob up here is a series of GPS points showing that she's at the drug dealer's house on Arkwright Lane from about 10:45 p.m. to 10:55. And she's scoring drugs to use that night because she doesn't like the way she's feeling. While she's gone, Paul gets home. He had clocked out at 9:56 p.m. He was smoking a blunt in the parking lot or something like that. You're going to hear a lot about drug use in this case. And he gets home while the defendant is still out on this trip to the drug dealer. And he'll tell you that when he got home, he went in and said hey to Danny, And he saw the kids, he saw Quinton in his crib, in his pack and play, and Quinton was fine. He even interacted with him a little bit. But he's there and he's okay. Now, by 10 after 11, she's got a bunch of GPS points hitting at the house on Buckhalter Road. And this is just to signify that this is around when she gets home. 10 after 11. Paul is upstairs in his bedroom, going to sleep, kind of secluded from the rest of the family. And Danny eventually goes to sleep as well. And you'll hear her say this to the investigators, that she was the only one up and active in the middle of the night, in the hours leading up towards 1 a.m. My tooth was hurting. I couldn't sleep. What she's doing is she's going on a bender. You'll hear her admit to this eventually with the police. She didn't want to talk about it initially, but you'll hear that she eventually acknowledged that she was up kind of frantically using drugs. You'll hear her talk about it. I would hit a line, I would go outside, I would smoke a blunt to kind of bring myself down, maybe smoke a cigarette, then I'd hit another line and repeat the cycle. So she's in her house by herself, physically uncomfortable because of her dental issue, emotionally wrecked because of what's going on with her and Danny. It's just an ever-present problem for her. And this is a bad situation, right? This is a volatile, dangerous situation. And that's because you'll hear something that she later said during the investigation on a recorded call, on a recorded phone call to Daniel, who was cooperating with the police and trying to help them gain information about the effect that cocaine has on her. It's not just fun for her. You'll hear her say that it makes her angry and impulsive.
I will not touch. I'll never touch cooking on the others. And I become angry and impulsive when I'm on it.
And so those are the conditions. She's up all alone, physically uncomfortable, emotionally unhappy, unstable to some degree. And around 1 a.m. probably, she kills Quinton.